best bagel maker in New York, but they were the only ones that were set up to export. So we had to buy 80,000 bagels on our first shipment. So they arrived over, and like all the customs guys were scratching their head going, what are they? They thought we were importing beagles. They thought it was dogs.
Today on the podcast, I am chatting with Domini Kemp. Domini is one of the most well-known chefs, TV personalities, cookbook author, and restaurant owner in Dublin. Along with her sister Peaches, she owns a mini empire of restaurants in Dublin, which started back in 1999 with a little bagel restaurant called Itsa Cafe. If you haven't already done so, click the subscribe button to get brand new episodes every single week directly to your feed. Domini, it's great to have you on the podcast. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Honestly, Domini, I really don't know where to start because there's so much going on with you and your career, both professionally and all your different businesses. But just to kick off, I'd love to kind of get a little bit about your background before, I suppose, people kind of knew who Domini Kemp was.
Yeah, well, I suppose my early career was very much focused on horses and competitively competing as a junior rider, and then moved into senior ranks. I would have started my first business when I was 21, selling really kind of custom-made horse equipment for horses and riders. And then I was always interested in cooking, and my sister was working in restaurants here in Dublin, and she'd done a cookery course with Alex Gardner, who ran a cookery school here in Dublin. And then, so I'd often work for her as a teenager, and then sort of eventually had to start making some life decisions. So I decided I'd go to chef school. I was based over in the UK at that stage, still competing and still buying and selling horses and teaching and doing bits of everything. Got my, went to chef school, got my piece of paper, started working in some restaurants over in London, and started doing a lot of private catering, and then came back, chance meeting, met my ex-partner, Conrad Gallagher, who just opened up Peacock Alley. He'd just come back from New York and Monte Carlo, been working in Alain Ducasse's 3-star over there. He opened up Peacock Alley. We met, just clicked. And so I was kind of plunged into running what ended up becoming a Michelin star restaurant in my mid-20s, and very much thrown in the deep end. But, as his partner at the time, it was everything from, giving a dig out in the kitchen or working on the floor. And he was writing cookbook at the time, so taking over that project, looking after all the marketing and that. So it was a great crash course in restaurants. And really, then when we parted ways, my sister and I, we started just our very first bagel store, started importing bagels from New York. And it was a little tiny shop. And really from there, just the business grew very organically in terms of, we started getting into event catering and so on. The kind of fine dining background I'd had in Peacock Alley had really helped anchor our approach to some of those things. So we were interested in more casual food at the start, and then launched Feast Catering, and really then from there just started growing and opening up different cafes and different restaurants and different brands and different concepts. So that's kind of in a nutshell over the last 25 years, I suppose.
Excellent. And let's get right into it. So you mentioned there you opened up what was Itsa, right?
Yeah.
And a bagel, you brought bagels to Ireland. Like, so obviously everyone knows bagels now, and they're, we all have them in the morning with our butter and jam, but they were quite new at the time, weren't they?
Totally. And like literally in the customs, because we had to buy a whole container, and the place that we bought them is a company called H&H. They were actually featured on Sex and the City and Friends and so on. They're kind of like the best bagel maker in New York, but they were the only ones that were set up to export. So we had to buy 80,000 bagels on our first shipment. So they arrived over, and like all the customs guys were scratching their head going, what are they? They thought we were importing beagles. They thought it was dogs. So it's like they had no category for it in all their customs and excise books. So it was, and people kept scratching their head going, why are you doing this? And in fairness, again, it's something I often talk to startups about. so many people will always try and convince you not to do it. And like, if we'd listened to a lot of the advice, we never would have got our business off the ground, because people were going, you're mad, you're absolutely mad, what are you doing? So, you know, but we had firm belief in what we were doing, and that we were also going to do amazing fillings, you know. So we were going to make everything on site, roast our meats, you know, make our red onion marmalade and all that stuff. You have to remember, back in the early 90s, you know, the most exotic sandwich was, you know, ham, cheese and coleslaw with thick white bread. That was it, you know. So now, of course, it's completely transformed, and you have the coolest spots doing just the most amazing food, and a whole bunch of great people that come into this casual sector. But back then it was a real desert in terms of casual food.
And where, like, do you think it was, because obviously, you know, you're still opening up restaurants in Ireland today. Do you think it was an easier landscape to open up a restaurant back then, or how would you view that?
I think people were maybe reluctant to spend money on food. I think that whole dining out culture had not really come to Ireland. Eating out was still kind of seen as a treat, whereas now, you know, people would happily, you know, COVID aside, maybe go out 2 nights a week, and you know, they have such a broad range, you know. But back then, you either went out for dinner for a kind of special occasion, but that mid market was really quite poor, and there weren't a lot of options. So I think that has completely changed, and maybe people, you know, it was probably easier to be better, whereas now I think there's so much competition, and of course,
Yeah.
because of the internet and social media, we see so many things, and we're bombarded with images and cool ways to plate up stuff and cool combinations and everything. So you know, there's this race all the time to be better, more innovative, and so on, that didn't probably exist back in the 90s. You'd have your food publications, you'd have your restaurants, you'd have the newspapers, you'd have the critics, who were very much, you know, godlike in terms of determining your fate. And after that, things just happened at a much slower pace. So I think it was easier in one way, but maybe it was harder to get your foot in the door, or maybe get landlords, or get properties, or get finance. I think that side of it was definitely harder.
Okay, that's very interesting. And just going back to Itsa, where, just out of curiosity, where did the concept come from?
So I had been looking at it because Conrad and I, we were together. Anytime we went to the States or we go to New York, you know, it was such a treat to get a bagel, because they are delicious. You know, they're great, and
Yeah.
especially when they're made in the traditional way. They're boiled first and then baked. So we had kind of talked about it, and then I knew he wasn't going to do anything with the idea. I pursued it, got the deal done with H&H, but my daughter at the time was quite young, so I was really reluctant to go back to working nights initially, because she was young, and it is hard with young children to work nights. So I wanted something daytime, but I wanted to do something with good food. So it was kind of trying to take some of those lessons, apply them in a very kind of casual daytime way. And, you know, I'd gone to New York to do the deal with H&H Bagels, and a friend of mine at the time, who's a designer in New York, and we're out having drinks and trying to come up with the name. And there's a word in Yiddish, essa, and it kind of means here you go. And anyway, we were kind of had probably too many drinks, and then thought, it's a brand, it's a. So luckily someone had scribbled it down, you know. So sort of the next day, looking at a beer mat of our sort of R&D notes, and there it was, and it just kind of stuck, and it just seemed like a good name, and really it just went from there.
That's class. That's a great story. And I suppose actually opening up Itsa, can you talk to me about that process of opening up the first Itsa?
Yeah, it was, I mean, because it was back in the Epicurean food hall. So it's now a done deal. It's very sad when you walk past it. It's thingy.
Yeah.
So at the time, I think it was probably a bit premature, and it was probably located on the wrong side of town. You know, that whole area, now the landscape has changed dramatically. But back then, again, you know, the late 90s, it was pretty rough around that area. And the initial lineup was pretty exceptional. You know, there was ourselves, Cavistons were there. There was Mark Michel with his organic veg. There's the big cheese company. There was a guy, Mustafa, who actually had been a pastry chef in Peacock Alley, worked in Clarence. did the most beautiful pastries. You know, he had a really strong Michelin background, worked in some great places in London. So he was doing the most exquisite pastries and everything. So there's a great lineup of shops and kind of interesting ethnic food stores and stands and everything that was really good, but it was just probably a little bit ahead of its time, you know, and as I said, especially where it was located, you know, which is not to disparage anything on the north side, but it was just the way it was. Down there, people were kind of going, you know, why would I pay this for an organic carrot? It just didn't quite work. It's a great concept, great idea. Unfortunately, though, it's just the rents became prohibitive. You know, like a lot of these things, landlords get greedy. And what happens is the people who are doing really good quality usually find themselves not being able to sustain those levels of expenses. And what happened was they started getting replaced with operators that were just doing cheap, fried, fast food, very high margin, very poor quality, but just worked in terms of financially. So the good guys started getting squeezed out. Really, of the original lineup, there were maybe 2 or 3 of us left, and eventually it just became untenable. So we were able to move it's across the road to Arnott's then and jump to that opportunity. But it was just a shame because, but again, this is always the battle. You know, the people that do really good stuff in relation to food often find the biggest struggles commercially, and it's a kind of cruel thing, but it's the same in so much art, music, and everything. You know, can you compare someone who's a really beautiful singer songwriter to, you know, somebody who's top of the charts? It's just it is unfair sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. And I suppose so. You moved the location then, and talk to me then about kind of I suppose the progress then that you made. Like when you moved the location, how did that go for you?
Yeah, it was good. I mean, at that stage, we probably had 3 or 4 other locations under our belt by the time we moved the first Itsa over to Arnott's. But you know, again, it was that kind of relentless pursuit of just trying to find locations, properties, getting landlords to agree to the concept, trying to get funding. You know, all those things. You know, we're so much more efficient at it now, but also we have a name and we have our own reputation and so on to help leverage and get those projects across the line. But back then it was very much a learning curve, and there weren't a lot of opportunities for mentoring and so on. Again, all that's kind of changed now, which makes it a lot easier, and there's a lot more business support for people wanting to start up their own business, and greater recognition, I suppose, about how important entrepreneurs are in general for economies and towns and villages and for the high street. So it's definitely easier, but you know, there's an awful lot to getting a food business up and running. And you know, as I say, the luxury of being a retailer and just literally unpacking a box and putting it on a shelf and selling it for margin. Whereas if you think a food business, it's like they have to source the fabric, then they have to find a designer, then they have to create the clothing, and then they have to, you know, and market. It's entirely different. So we have a lot on our plate, I think, as food business, and a lot of responsibilities. And there are so many stages at each, you know, design stage of process or manufacture, or whatever way you want to look at it, where things can get cocked up, you know, and that's the simple fact. So you're always trying to look at the systems and how you do things, how you can simplify things. And I think one of the important things to remember is once you start wanting to grow your business or expand, you are never going to get 100%. You're just not. So unless you're owner occupier, you're there every day and you're, you know, overseeing every plate and everything, you have to recognize that you're only ever going to get probably 80% of what you want. And I suppose those first few years, I used to drive myself insane trying to get to 100% instead of looking for 80% and then making that work and making that the sort of goal. And I think you have to be able to accept that if you want to grow a business.
Right, very good. That's good advice, I think, for a lot of people out there. You touched there on kind of on growing your business, and it's one thing that I'm very interested in, kind of, I suppose, looking at a business and seeing something that's kind of scalable, right? And I'd look at like your business right from the beginning. It strikes me as a concept that is scalable, right? And obviously is from your success. But I suppose, was that something on your mind, Domini, when you started it, that, I want to have a product and a business that I can actually grow and, replicate in other locations?
I think we were a lot less ambitious in some ways because, this small voice in the back of your head that says, don't be getting notions about stuff. So I think, and again, that would be something I would, for young entrepreneurs and budding entrepreneurs who I would work with quite regularly and stuff. And I would say to them, have the confidence, okay, you may not want to articulate it because you're a bit embarrassed about sounding like, an egomaniac, but actually do think in bigger terms, because a lot of the things that you do, you should try and future proof for when you go ahead. So, say you're very committed to the brand, making sure there's protections around that. It may not be that you need to trademark it and go to that extreme, but certainly, making sure that you're not going to run into problems because 3 other businesses exist with very similar branding, very similar names, and so on. So again, just taking the care and taking the time to make sure that what you do will be able to stand the test of time, and especially if you add 5 locations to the same concept. And again, thinking about how you might do that. So, do you need to build in bandwidth, to your systems, to things like your website, all that stuff. You have to remember as well, I mean, it's hilarious. Back in the day when websites first started, used to cost us about 200 quid just to change a price on them. Like, it was insane. Wow. Whereas now, I can build a website in a couple of hours, you know what I mean? So it's a completely transformed. So a lot of money might have been spent on technologies and different things that are now just not factors for startup companies and businesses. So I think it's a lot easier in many ways, but as I said, the competition is just ferocious nowadays. It really is.
Wow, very interesting. And just out of curiosity, I think my a lot of my listeners are kind of restaurant and food business owners. You obviously have multiple locations, and they're all. I'm right in saying that they're all kind of company owned, right?
Yes, we've no franchises.
I'd be interested to get your viewpoint on that. Like, did you ever consider the kind of franchise route, and if why not?
So we did, and what ended up coming out of the work, and we went quite far down the road with one franchise partner, potential partner, and what really came to the fore was the type of control in terms of wanting to supply them with ingredients that we made and everything. There was going to be difficulties in how much we could sort of insist on. So I think unless you have the money and the scale of a McDonald's or a Subway or someone that is, this is the rule of the law and you can't deviate from it, I think you can end up with difficulties as to what direction, a potential franchisee wants to go in, and certainly what your vision for it is. So I think problems started to emerge on how we would do things and the systems and so on. And then someone sat me down, they're like, we're not America. It's tiny. This country is tiny. There is no reason that you can't have these businesses yourself and run them yourself. You don't need to franchise this out. So I think it ended up being a lot of hassle, a lot of time wasted. And then at the end of the day, we just decided it wasn't for us.
Very good. That's interesting. And talking to me a little bit about Domini, kind of, because you have Itsa, but you also have lots of other brands and projects and stuff like that. So can you talk to me a little bit about some of the other stuff you have?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, Joe's Coffee, we started in kind of 2013, I think it was. And, that was really, the specialty coffee market was really starting to explode. And I think in Itsa, we've just always been focused on food. We kind of didn't really give a damn about the coffee to a large extent. And then really as people started coming home from Australia and places like that, and really demanding. So I remember hearing about this thing called a flat white, and I'm like, what? What is that? And, then, so it starts changing. I mean, coffee is delicious now, but like, again, so far away from what we used to all serve or used to tolerate, the lighter roasts and everything. So I think that became a really interesting change in the market. So Joe's really kind of was tapping into that. Hatch and Sons, we came up with the idea during the recession, really. And it was, I suppose, because we felt that there weren't enough daytime operations celebrating Irish food and Irish suppliers. You had Chapter One doing it at a very high level, and really championing the provenance and individual suppliers and producers. So we wanted to do something like that in a very casual daytime way. And that's what Hatch was about. It's also in a listed building on Stephen's Green, so there could be no cooking. So we have a 5,000 square foot CPU up in Sandyford. So we act like a supplier to ourselves, to our brands, where we don't have kitchens. So it was Hatch, and it was really leveraging, I suppose, the brilliant suppliers that we had, their marketing and everything. It was just, I think the whole thing was very clever in terms of just letting the product shine and just taking a very simple approach to it. So Hatch was something I loved working on, and just, it was very kind of a brand with a lot of integrity. Alchemy Juice Co. was something that kind of came about because I'd had cancer in 2013, and I really changed my focus on food as medicine. And, you know, it's really influenced what I've done the last few years in terms of going back to education and really trying to ramp up my own personal knowledge in terms of nutrition and health and culinary medicine. And so Alchemy was really the response to that. So it was really trying to cater for every kind of food religion, whether you were low carb, keto, vegan, you know, paleo, whatever it was, whether you wanted low fat, whether you want, you know, it didn't matter. We were sort of agnostic about it all in terms of whatever you want, we want to try and feed you something that's plant-based and really wholesome. So that was something, it was a real love for me of that. And sadly, the last place would have been in Kildare Village, and it's now been flattened to make way for phase 3 of their for more shopping. So it closed last year, and we haven't managed to find a new home for it. But those are some of the brands in terms of Itsa, Joe's, Hatch and Sons, Alchemy. Then we have some standalone places. We opened up the Commons in the Museum of Literature, which was a really great restaurant, unfortunately closed because of COVID. And then in Brent Thomas, we opened up there last June as well. So we have 2 restaurants in BT Dublin, Edition and Hugh Brown's. So, but they're all standalone with their own kitchens and their own teams and stuff. So they're independent of what happens in the CPU.
Wow, that's fantastic. And just on that point as well, I'd be very interested to get your view on this. So you mentioned there you have kind of, I suppose, your strategic plan when it came to growing the business, and like you don't necessarily locate all of your places right on Grafton Street, right, or on the high street. Like you have some kind of interesting, you know, you're in shopping centres and museums and stuff. I'd love to get your opinion on that. Like, what was the direction for that?
So there's a really, you lose a certain amount of independence because you are in partnership to a large extent. So when you operate in a museum or a department store, there's great support in terms of everyone has a mission. So for the museums, it might be the visitor experience and getting, you know, more people through their front door. For the department stores, obviously there's a footfall issue, but there's a sort of an agreement that, you know, they're responsible for getting people in the door, and then you're responsible for keeping them within the doors because you're supplying them with good food and so on. And obviously with retail, it's all about the dwell time and increasing that. So everyone has skin in the game, and I suppose that side of it is nice, and you're able to piggyback and leverage off their massive sort of marketing and PR potential and so on. So there are very good synergies, but as I said, you know, you have to then adhere to a lot of things. So for example, in the department stores, we have to adhere to their opening hours, you know, so there's no such thing as say, sure, we'll shut the business for 2 weeks in January because we want to give all the staff holidays. No, you know what I mean? And literally you are open 364 days a year. There's one day that they close, which is Christmas Day, and that's it. So, you know, there are different obligations and responsibilities. So, you know, we've some standalone units and then some that we partner up with. And I think there's advantages and disadvantages to both setups.
Excellent. And without kind of delaying on this point too much, because I to be honest, I'm sick of COVID and I don't want to be talking about that on this podcast.
Don't give it any oxygen. Don't give it any. We just pretend it doesn't exist.
Yes, exactly. But just talking about kind of the high streets are kind of pretty empty at the moment, right? I'd love to get kind of your own growth plan with the business going forward. Like, has it changed at all in terms of where you'd be looking at kind of putting potential new locations?
Definitely. I think that we flirted with some of the kind of online stuff during the summer, and it kind of blew up. It didn't kind of work for us.
Okay.
And I think, but sometimes you have to try these things,
Yes, yes.
but also recognize if it's not working and pull the plug quite quickly. So I think my concern is that people have got very institutionalized and very used to just ordering food. And so we've become a lot more American like that. And Americans, in general in the cities just order everything. Like they
Yeah.
just don't cook.
Okay.
And even you have apartments and stuff where they don't bother even installing kitchens. They put a microwave and a dishwasher and a sink and a fridge, and that's kind of it. There's no real
Wow.
cooking equipment because people don't need it. And why would you give over square footage in your living
Yes,
space
yes.
for
Of
something you
course.
don't need? So it's,
Wow.
so if you think about architecture and building designs and all these kind of things, we are now shifting more to that kind of American model of certainly being lazy about cooking. That for me is, I find, very depressing from a health point of view and a
Yeah.
family point of view and a societal point of view. But I do understand the luxury and the comfort and the ease of it as well. So I am concerned that people have just, there will be an element where, how do we get them back out? How do we get people out celebrating and stuff? And of course, everyone's fed up and they're dying to get out. And you see people saying, I'd murder a pint and this, that, and t'other. But at the same time, there is a slowness that I think people have just got very used to their own four walls. So restaurants are going to have to work really hard to get people back out and spending. And I think that the city planners are going to have to really think, because retail, it's never going to be the same. So you're going to have those sort of flagship stores where you go in and it's experiential. You can test the makeup, smell the perfume, go on the gadget, whatever, like those
Yeah.
flagship Apple stores. And I think we'll see that a lot for retail in general, or the kind of click and collect, or just, you try on the clothes and then you get it delivered. I think that's going to be what retail on the high street is going to look like. So we've got to be thinking about our green spaces culturally, what those empty shops are going to look like, and really try and encourage more people to be living in the city center. Because if we don't have that vibrancy, our cities will be lost forever, and that would be a huge shame for the businesses that do remain on site.
Wow, fascinating. And I suppose looking at your own growth plan, then, if it's okay with you, I'd love to
Yep.
kind of hear a little bit about what your plans are for the future with your group.
So we have a really interesting concept that we're working on currently, which is a bit premature to share, but it is sort of, I suppose, capturing a lot of the my own personal kind of love affair with all things health. So we're looking at that, and that will be a kind of subscription based type of
Okay.
product. So that's something I'm kind of excited about. Obviously, we do a huge amount of weddings and events and catering, and that how that business is going to have to
Yeah.
change. I think, are we going to be back up to even 50 people next summer? Who knows? We lost 22 weddings last year, gone.
Oh.
And so it's like, how are they going to come back, and how are people going to celebrate en masse? I think that's something that we all have to think about when we're working in the kind of event business. I think that we all need to think about how we're going to approach that in the future. And then other than that, I mean, it's sort of one of these things. I think, I'm currently in the Royal College of Surgeons, and I'm doing a course in positive health. I'm doing culinary medicine. I did my MA in food and gastronomy there a couple of years ago, and got my master's. But I think that we're in a funny place now where the world has irrevocably changed, and we have to think about what future business is going to look like and work backwards from that. Because, habits have changed, and they've changed forevermore. They say it takes 2 months for habits to kick in and to sink in and stuff. And we've
Yeah.
definitely achieved that in lockdown over the
Okay.
year.
Wow, fantastic. Well, maybe not fantastic, but it's very interesting anyways.
Yeah.
I really appreciate your time, Dominic, and I'm going to finish up with a few short ones.
Yes.
You mentioned the CPU there, central production unit, and I think that's obviously a model that a lot of kind of businesses, restaurants use as they begin to scale. Like, did that make a big difference to your, I suppose, like, let's even say the bottom line, like, financially?
Yeah. It was a game changer, because prior to that we were sort of half doing some food in one location and half doing the other, and so on. The only thing I would say is that there's huge cost involved in getting a CPU up and running. And then it's like that whole thing, you have more space, everything becomes less efficient, believe it or not. There's a lot of advantages to being able to bulk purchase things and so on.
Yes,
But
yes.
you can tie up a lot of money trying to be too clever,
Yes.
focusing
Okay.
on the price per packaging, and then suddenly you've all this product sitting up on the shelf. So what I would say to people is don't make that investment till you are at the bursting point. I think we probably moved to the kit. We pounced on an opportunity, but it was probably a year or 2 years before we required it. It was a very big space. And the problem is you end up hiring people to fill those spaces. So it's one of those things. Be as patient as you can, and just sometimes it's good to move into a space that you can grow into a bit more, as opposed to taking up the whole space. That's another way of kind of approaching it, or even subletting half of it out.
Yes.
That can also be an
Okay.
operation where you share some expenses. And I think certainly sharing some resources around waste, water, all those kinds of things. I think there's definitely some advantages and benefits to that approach.
Excellent. That's really good. And another kind of maybe similar kind of chefy question, but I'd love to know how you, like, operationally, how do you actually manage all of your different places, right, spread out across the city? Like, I mean, do you, like, maybe for use of a better term, but like, do you have like a good corporate structure, or do you have like different departments for different areas, or how do you do it?
Yes. So very much so. So obviously there's finance, there's operations, there's health and safety, and then there's the kitchen. And then each operation would have their own individual manager who's answerable to the ops team, who are then answerable to finance, and who are ultimately answerable to me and Peaches. So they're very clear sort of lines of responsibility and reporting. Using good systems, using technology. We would use Bizimply for rostering, which I think is an absolutely fantastic system. I'd be a bit of a technophobe in terms of, I hate systems for the sake of it.
Yes.
Nobody
Okay.
uses it, and
Yes.
unless
Yes.
you're somebody maintaining a system all the time, it just becomes redundant. So I think Bizimply is fantastic. We changed from Micros, a very clunky, very heavy, very expensive system, a few years ago, over to something that was iPad based and all cloud based. Just another game changer, like so easy to make menu changes and whatever. We've managed to kind of track real time rostering with sales. So again, managers can see in real time what their labor percentage is and make adjustments to rosters and so on. And really then it's making sure that the accounts is really efficient. We just moved over to a sort of a scanning system for all invoices and everything. So again, it's just making sure that the systems are there and that they're robust, and really, you're not going to get everything or catch every mistake
Yes.
or that. But again, it's just having systems as robust as possible, and sensible things. We'll go in and do spot checks, whether it's on floats or what's in the safe or whatever. And again,
Yeah.
just making sure that it's clear that we're all paying attention and that we have our eye on the ball at all times. I think that's really important. And as well as that, it's Peaches and I, we work hard, we get stuck in, we go into different units, we're hands-on, we're there to support. We don't go around and try and take over, but we're there to
Yeah.
support. And sometimes that means getting stuck into the wash up, whatever it means, and seeing what are the problems as well. You might have somebody saying, oh, we need a new oven, we need this, we need that. It's sometimes really useful to just go in and spend an hour and just see the problems. Have we laid this place out incorrectly? Is,
Yeah.
where are the pinch points? And then being able to address it in that way.
Excellent. And you mentioned there, Dominic, just about you said you track labor to sales on a daily basis. Like, how do you do that? Is that just through Excel, or is that through the platforms you
Yeah,
were
so
talking about?
Exactly. So we have targets now. Obviously, everything's kind of blown to pieces
Yeah.
now in terms of trying to budget and trying to do, but again, you have to have the discipline, even though you're just going, what's the point? What's the point? We don't know when we're going to reopen, whatever. Just do the exercise, keep doing it so you can adjust it as things change. And, we know what supports are getting removed and dropped in. Just keep at it and keep that discipline and focus. Don't put your head in the sand with it. But under normal circumstances, budgets are done. We have our sales information for the previous year. So that is there in terms of monthly, what's your target for this month, hopefully a little bit of an uplift on it. And then basically what the labor percentage needs to be in that unit. And then they can see very clearly they've had a great day. They're 3 or 4% under where they need to, but they know on a Monday afternoon, they're going to get hammered. So again, it's just getting them to look at it and knowing, great, I've won over on these 2 days, I'm going to lose over here, and to be able to make adjustments. It's not such an issue when you have a high margin, you're working in restaurants and you can sell booze and so on. It's less pressure, but certainly in the coffee world where it's a very low margin, and you're going for volume as a business, every hour counts when you have 120 staff. Sometimes not 1% on the labor, it's 0.1%, which can achieve huge savings. So it's that whole thing of looking after the pennies and the pounds to take care of themselves.
Yeah, very good. I love that. I think that's great advice. And we could talk all day, Domini, but we have to wrap it up. Let's finish up on this one. You're a long time in business, you've achieved huge success. What advice would you give to kind of a young budding restaurant owner? What would that be?
I think don't be naive, and sometimes you'll hear people saying, I want to open up a restaurant because I want work-life balance. And you're like, find a 9-to-5 job, love. So I think just have your eyes open to really quite how hard it is. Have good supports around you, and be very, very conscious that you cannot burn the candle at both ends. So if you want to do this, and you're going to commit time and money and a big chunk of your working life that's taking away from home and family and community and so on, then just make sure you're going into it with your eyes wide open. It is not easy. It's incredibly hard work. And you need to be able to know how to do everything. You don't necessarily have to know how to do it very well, but know how to do every aspect of the business so that, again, you're not completely beholden to anyone. I think that's really important. Of course, hire good people. If you're going to be the chef and you want to hire a good manager, that's great. But go and learn as much as you can so that you have an idea as to how well they're performing as well. I think that's really important. And also go and eat in your own restaurant. If you get it set up and so on, and you want to take a night, go and eat, or send your other chefs in, bring them in to eat or something. Get the experience and try and see what your business is like from a customer's perspective. That's also really, really important.
Excellent. Thanks so much for that, Dominic. That was really fantastic. And I wish you all the best over the next couple of months.
Same to you. It's been an absolute pleasure, Evan. Thank you so much.
Thanks for watching the Business of Restaurants podcast with me, Evan O'Callagher. For new episodes every single week, subscribe below.